Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm here with Reed and also our paid media. Are you paid media strategist? Is that what you are, Abby?
I think I'm a strategist or I'm a specialist. I'm one or the other.
Paid media something. You
Something. I feel
do
like I'm a
work on the.
strategist. I know the second I say I'm a strategist, I'm just going to go to my LinkedIn profile and find out I'm a specialist. So I just have no confidence.
Yeah,
You're
well, I
a
barely know what Reed's title is, so it's
you're
fair.
you're a special strategist.
A special
Yeah.
strategist. We'll just make it a new thing.
Well, we wanted to bring Abby on. She joined us, I guess, 7 months ago. I just learned, which it seems like you've been here forever, Abby, but it also seems like you just got here. But she joined us from the vacation rental. I guess I'll call it industry. I might as well, right? It's that
Yeah.
big. Vacation, and Reed and I noticed there's a lot of similarities with vacation rentals and apartments, and so we've wanted to have Abby on for some time just to talk through her transition into the space. And Reed, you were particularly excited to get, I'll say, a series of podcasts here kicked off with talking about to different people that have transitioned into the industry. So why don't you give quick background there, Reed, on that, and then we'll ask Abby what we talk about today.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes, I guess, sense that we would look at some of the adjacent categories, and this would be one of them, to see how much overlap there is between multifamily and these, I guess, peripheral industries, but also for those that are coming from within multifamily or already inside of it, and then moving, to the vendor side. So that's a bit of a tease or a sneak peek of some of the other conversations that we'll have, but it's always fun hearing, different perspectives, especially after they've made, I don't want to say the plunge because we love this industry. So hopefully Abby feels the same way, that it's been a great move for her, but just how they experience it, observations they make, differences in technology, data sets, all sorts of fun stuff. So if that doesn't get you reared up and wanting to listen, I don't know what will. But yeah, great.
Yeah. So Abby, if I'm a listener, why would I tune in today? What did you talk about in this episode?
Talked a lot about the differences and similarities. I think really kind of scary is what we see, a lot of similarities between vacation rentals and the apartment rental industry, and those tiny little details set them apart. And I think those little details are really kind of intricate here, and what makes my job really fun, and where I get to be strategically creative every single day and have so much fun doing it.
Yeah, Abby gets into a little bit about the budgeting in apartments versus vacation rentals, because there's just imagine that they're basically doing it day by day instead of month by month. And then you definitely get into some of the optimizations as Reed grills you on fair housing and how that impacted that industry. And then I think at the end, a surprise, you brought back up the ILSs and the directories and how they relate, and significant difference between the two industries, which now I'm interested to dive in deeper on later on. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think there's anything else, right, guys?
I'll just say Abby's a natural. I think she's got her own podcast in her future somewhere.
My own Dear Abby, no copyright infringement.
Yeah, you're going to have to tweak that just a little bit, I have a feeling.
Probably. I'll work on it.
Cool.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and stay tuned if you want to hear the rest. There you go, Reed. All right. Well, Abby, so shoot, I guess I shouldn't introduce this, Reed. This is your concept. Why don't I let you introduce?
Yeah, well, I mean, we both talked to Abby and big fans, and we're going to try not to play off of the whole Dear Abby, but you brought it up on the coffee last week.
Yeah.
But I've said a couple of times, you were one of my favorite interviews. Just so much, I'd say, perspective and opinion. Confidence, just a real refreshing personality when we first came across you. And you, as I told you, have lived up to the hype, which isn't easy. Some people interview really well, but then, it doesn't always turn out. So it's been great seeing you, I think, spread your wings the way we were hoping. And it's still early stages here at Digible. But one of the things that I think probably gave you maybe some added confidence was that experience that you had in vacation rentals. So you had a little bit more familiarity than most that have come into multifamily or come into Digible. And I thought it'd be really interesting to hear you talk us through that, starting with just general background on yourself. And then, the stop, I won't call it a detour along the way, in vacation rentals. And then we can talk a little bit more, if not a lot more, about how you're seeing things now and what's changed, what's interesting, and have you been able to leverage some of that background?
Awesome.
So, yeah. So why don't you start with just, I won't make it too formal, like first name, last name, but yeah, why don't you just tell us, 5 minutes about yourself?
So I grew up in Southern California in a town called Burbank, which is the kind of typical small town, but in a Los Angeles form. So I also grew up kind of in that movie industry type of world, which influenced a lot of my career decisions in terms of internships and what I thought was going to be my post-career move. But I decided after coming to Colorado for school that I just loved it so much that I wanted to explore opportunities out here. Kind of stumbled around at a few different spots and ended up at a company which worked in vacation rentals, which essentially when I was there, I was kind of in charge of, it was a smaller company. So I worked in an office about 3 different people. And when I say I worked in vacation rentals, I was like marketing person one and only for this vacation rental company, which was great because, I think both you, Reed and David, know that I'm super hungry in my career to learn and to grow. And that position did give me a lot of the opportunity, especially within vacation rentals. And, I have such a drive and love and passion for travel and exploring the world. And I thought this was going to kind of like leverage that love and hopefully move it into more of that kind of career path. And it was a really cool opportunity because I got to do a lot within all realms of marketing. So prior to that, I really only had a lot of experience with, I would say, like basic level social media marketing and then events marketing and public relations and some product marketing as well, which is great. And I did have fun with that. But this really allowed me to kind of like dive into literally every single aspect of marketing that you could think of, from internal marketing to, company newsletters and, customer newsletters and, Google ads, Facebook ads, everything under the sun was just kind of thrown into my lap. And I got that opportunity to learn by the fire. Which was really great. And it was a fun industry to be in. I did get to travel a little bit within Colorado and visit a lot of really cool properties, a lot of really gorgeous locations. And, when the time came to say goodbye, I was wondering if it was the right career move for me to kind of take away, exit the whole travel industry side of it. But I couldn't really deny the opportunity that Digible was essentially offering me, and decided to kind of dive more into the love that I found for paid media and Facebook ads and Google ads and display, and really hone in on my creative skills within that realm. So that's how I ended up with Digible from the vacation rental industry.
And to be clear, your vacation rentals, even though it was a small office, there were a number of units and properties. Like, I think if you would just help explain that, like to how it would relate similarly to apartments, but
Yeah.
you guys had, I guess I'll say, a resort, and then you guys would have a certain number of units at that resort, and then you would have to market each of those, kind of like Airbnb or VRBO or whatever, but on your own sites.
Yeah, in a way, we didn't have so much resorts as we had locations. So the company I worked for specifically worked in a franchise model, and there would be individual owners who would own, say, vacation rentals for Breckenridge, vacation rentals for Copper, vacation rentals for Vail, and so on and so forth. And then within each of those locations, there would be anywhere between 10 to 200 properties that would be owned and marketed by those property location owners. So I had a lot, so very similar to apartments, there were a lot of stakeholders within there. Not only were we worried about how the owners of the apartments were, kind of perceiving their marketing and their growth in that way. It was also a huge stakeholder were the owners of the locations, which are a lot like the property managers. There we go. Lost the word there. That we handle today with our clients.
Right. So I think what was I guess, like almost scarier to me about that type of business, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're basically trying to lease out a vacation rental. Like certainly the weekends during winter are easy, let's say, in the ski resorts, right? But now, I mean, do you know offhand, like, were you guys shooting to have like each unit rented like 25 days of the month, let's say, throughout the year? Because then the way that you managed budgets, because this is the crazy part, is how your company acted like a small management company where you were recommending budgets but also executing the campaigns, the search and social campaigns, all on yourself across thousands of well, I think it was thousands of properties. But then,
Yeah.
like, yeah, back to your, were you trying to lease out for 25 days at a time, or what was that number that was a good occupancy rate, if you would?
I think we'd really try to stick around 80%. So it wasn't quite as high as what we see in apartment rentals. And that really just has to do with turnover. So you can't, because really everyone is typically leaving on the same day, more or less. But even if you had, 80% of the 80 properties leaving on the same day, that's a lot for the cleaning units to manage. So we have to make sure like those are timed out properly to get the turnover ready. But then also for, in those like winter weekend months too, you also have to worry about the owners of the rental properties and when they want to stay there too. So there's not ever like a for sure, like we have to be booked up 80%, but that's like where we kind of like to see it.
Got it. And then your budgeting, the way that went about, because you had the different individual owners that may own a 2-bedroom in Breck.
Yeah.
Then you had your property managers that were in charge of, like, let's say 60 units in Breck. So how did you go about that process?
With budgeting, it was
Yeah,
really,
because
yeah, it was a
it was
huge
per
back
unit,
and
I think, right?
Yeah, so it was a huge back and forth with the location owners and myself, and then something that the location owners would build into their agreements with the property owners as well. So I think part of the initial agreement was like they had a marketing fee, let's call it, and then as part of their marketing fee every month that would dive into the bigger overall bucket of marketing money for the location.
Mm,
So
yeah.
if we had maybe, like I said, 100 properties, and there was, because they do pay a fee, like that's something else too, is that all the properties do pay a fee to be part of this franchise, which was one of the reasons why the company was even built up to begin with. And one of those fees was marketing. And so say if they had like a $5 fee for a month for 100 properties, then that location would have a $500 marketing budget for that month.
Yeah. Well, I can only imagine, like, how we're telling people to get in front of marketing and budget for a month in advance or 2 months in advance, and you guys are like turning units like, "Oh, I don't have anybody filled on Tuesday,"
Yeah.
right? And how you're trying to get that done. It just seems like insanity to me.
Well, it's a bigger, and that's something that I would definitely be involved with in terms of when the location owner would try to talk to the property owner in terms of how our marketing budget is being spent. And I presented at our conference that we had. I would say annually. I wasn't there for more than one conference, but the one conference that I was there for, in terms of how the marketing budget was being spent, I had a big breakdown I had to present to them, which and then they presented to the property owners. But the biggest issue was that it's harder, and it kind of goes back into the idea of retention, similar to how the property managers worry about retention with their residents as well, in terms of, if I'm paying a fee to have marketing spent for me, if I'm not getting this booked up on a Tuesday, or I'm not getting it booked up this third weekend in December, then, and I'm not making money on it. I'm actually losing money. I'm paying this company to manage this, property for me, but I'm not making money on it. Then what's the point of me staying with them? And those are big conversations.
Yeah. Well, Reed, now that we have that background, I just wanted to sort of talk through the business model as she was moving from vacations into apartments. So now I'll let you get back to your transitionary questions.
Well, those were a couple of the questions I had, so glad you already got to them. Staying somewhat with business questions or models, what did the typical market mix look like, or I'm sorry, media mix? How much has that differed from what you see with multifamily, as you think what sounded like still pretty constrained budgets, which is obviously what you're dealing with now? And part two of that question is fair housing. So super high sensitivity, obviously in multifamily. Did that even really hit your radar? Was there any talks, concerns about how you were targeting your campaigns?
Yeah, so I'll address the first part of that first. And essentially, my marketing mix looked a lot like it was mostly in social. I had experience with Google Ads before this and pushed it every single day that I was at my job, and got a few properties to kind of sign on and buy into the whole idea. But at the end of the day, you get, your budget just goes much further within social because your awareness is going out much further, and you can get some more leads, which was big for my CEO at the time. We also used it to prospect for new location owners as well. So it worked with a few different ways, but that's kind of where we started with the majority, whereas I know that differs with what we're seeing with apartments, which is great, which is mostly that we start off their media mix, typically in paid search. But I think that's, kind of fairly typical to the differences between apartments and vacations. And I think David and I had talked about this before, where it's much more experiential when it comes to vacation rentals, right? And so where apartments are a necessity and you're, usually you're planning for them because you have to be. You have to have a place to live. And so you have to plan for where your next one's going to be, whether it's going to be somewhere else or the same one that you're currently in. And vacations are different. You could be scrolling on Facebook and see somebody enjoying their vacation. And that's kind of what sparks the idea of, oh, maybe I should plan my own. And so it's not much more of like a regular, like, I need to be planning for a vacation. It's just like, that sounds nice. I think I'll sit down and plan a vacation today. And so you get more of that experiential marketing on Facebook. So that's why we kind of navigate more towards there within the world of vacation rentals as opposed to search.
And Facebook, has been most proactive and out of necessity, obviously, because they got in big trouble with HUD about the restrictions on targeting. So, what was your experience there? Did it get brought up much with your stakeholders? And, how much did you account for that?
So it was interesting because it was a big issue when I first came on, and I was really putting a big push. First came on, into the vacation rental company, and I was giving a big push into paid social, and I was running a few campaigns. I was running into the issue because some of my location owners, in addition to targeting guests, also wanted to target for prospective property owners as well. And similar to what we do with relocation campaigns, they would give me a list of, okay, most of my property owners come from say Denver, Colorado, for example. So can we target Denver, Colorado specifically? So I would set up a campaign to target for vacation rental owners in Denver, Colorado. But I ran into this big issue because I was trying to target zip codes. And you try to target someone who has a certain level of income, because not everyone can own a vacation rental or a second home for that matter. And so it really does require a second level of income. So that was my initial targeting. And I ran into this huge issue with Facebook, even before the HUD issues. And I found some workarounds. And then it's actually kind of funny and a little bit painful too, just all the memories from when that hit. But I came in for my interview literally like the day after Facebook's whole transformation thing. And I remember going into the interview room, and Adam and Jenny and Megan were like, have you guys finished updating all the Facebook ads? They were talking about it. And I was like, yep, I got to go home and do that for mine. And like my first conversation with Adam, I had a whole day of like working through my accounts and all the frustrations. And I was like, hi, probably didn't sound the most peppy the first time I ever talked to him, just because of the whole day of headaches. But it's a huge issue. And it's, just really interesting because, and it's a conversation that I had, I remember, with my stakeholders at the time too, because with Facebook, you self-allocate, right? You say, I am doing an ad for housing. And it was a conversation that we had to have kind of with our own legal team at the time and our team, and say, okay, well, do we check this box? Because we're not really offering multifamily housing, for month-long leases at a time. We're just offering vacation rentals. So where does that fall within HUD? And obviously it falls within there, but there's a difference, right? And I think one of the targeting is that you can target for interest in vacation rentals. So it did end up working out in that way, but it was a big conversation that we had.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of categories that are on the periphery of, multifamily and single family that, it seems somewhat discretional, like how much risk do you want to take?
Right.
From one stakeholder to the next. And we even experience that within multifamily. I mean, it's becoming more pervasive, I think, the sensitivity and concern and, wanting to know, how we account for that. But there's still plenty that I'd say are, I don't want to say less responsible, but just we'll call it a little bit more aggressive or more comfortable with that. So that is interesting. Getting briefly back to budgets, and then we can move on to a couple of other questions. But how fluid were budgets? Because we talk a lot, and it's kind of an epidemic. Maybe a horrible word to use right now. Around set and forget strategies, but I didn't know if that was pretty common. And it wouldn't be an indictment on you, Abby, with the amount of volume you were taking, but also, the clients you were working with. But how much variability or volatility would there be with budgets from one quarter to the next?
I think, it's really similar to what we experience now. And it's really because I had some location owners, and again, sorry, just to reiterate what I said before. So our location owners would set the budgets for all of the properties and marketing for that location. I know I just jumped back and forth, so I wanted to say that again. But our location owners would really vary between their level of involvement. So we'd have some location owners who I'd hop on a call with every single week to go over metrics and go over how their campaigns are performing, and some that I couldn't get on the phone for 2 months at a time. And so for those, it would be more of like, okay, well, this is going to be our budget. It's probably a lower budget. And we're just kind of hit those bare bone minimums, and I'll send you your numbers, but everything looks okay. And we're not going to worry too much about it. It's more of that set and forget strategy where I made it looks good, no complaints, we're moving on. And then my kind of higher touch clients are, constantly touching in, how can we optimize? And those ones will change budgets depending on how their campaigns are performing and if it's needed. So I think it is really similar to what we experience now, which is just kind of the human nature of it all, right? How involved are you going to be with it? So how much money are you willing to put behind it?
Cool. Well, curious now to talk about, you've already done a little of that, but post vacation rentals, enter multifamily, pan right, applying to your, movie lineage.
Yeah.
So what's been the biggest, I guess, early observations? What's motivated you? What has you frustrated? Just be raw with us, about how you've experienced multifamily since you've taken the role at Digible.
What was the first part of that? So there was experience, frustrated, and excited. Okay, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. I think one of the biggest things is that, and something that I've explained to people more is kind of something that I really am proud to say is that I really do love my job, which I graduated college about 3 years ago, I think like today probably. And this is the first time in those 3 years that I've truly loved the work that I'm doing. So kind of tick that off for like the experience that I'm liking. But one of the things that I really noticed off the bat is the ability to be technically creative within this role. I think that when I've been in previous roles, especially within the vacation rental and managing a lot of clients as that team of one, more than I probably was managing now, I have more of an opportunity now and more of the resources with a bigger team to be technically creative within the space. So it's not every single campaign isn't exactly the same. We can collaborate and work together to find ways to optimize every campaign. So while I'm working on, multifamily housing from one client to the next, every, apartment is different and every strategy there is different in its own way, which becomes a lot of fun for me as an employee and as someone who's trying to, keep learning and growing in that space. So that's been kind of like a fun thing that what?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's something that I didn't expect. I think from this industry I kind of expected it all to kind of be the same in that way. So I was really pleasantly surprised when I was able to find different ways to make it creative and make it its own for every different property manager.
And I forgot that Reed also asked you about your pain points or gripes, I guess is how I'm translating it. So I'll let you hit that before I tag on.
Okay. I think some frustrations that I've just noticed within the industry are just, I think honestly as property managers and properties, maybe not reaching for the highest potential they could be at. And that's really just in terms of their on-site, right? And so, because that's where I relate to them, is I touch base with them on their on-site. That's where I grab ad copy. That's where I grab photos for their gallery. That's where I get a really big sense of who they are as a property. And I mean, honestly, where site users get a big sense of who they are as well, right? Because that's where we drive people. And I think sometimes it's frustrating or a pain point when I see this great property, but their pictures maybe aren't super great or updated, or their ad copy isn't updated, or it has tons of typos in it, or it's the same thing as their, if it's kind of under the umbrella of a same property manager, that copy is the same from one to the next, right? So that's probably the biggest pain point, is really in frustration, is just, I really, I want these properties to succeed in the biggest way that they can. And I can't change their ad copy online, and I can't change their photos for them. So that's kind of the frustration, I think.
Yeah. Well, Reed was starting to hit at this, or you were in your answer to him, but obviously this whole conversation, I hear tons of similarities between the vacation rentals in this space, right? So what I guess my main tack on that I was curious in is, what do you see as the biggest difference or delineation or surprise between like vacation rentals and apartments? So obviously what I'd love to get out of this conversation, Abby, is what can the folks listening take away from that industry that you've learned that you're like, wow, you should totally take this from that other industry? And then what are the things where you're like, wow, this is totally different. I didn't expect it.
Yeah, I think, and I think you're right, David. I have kind of like, dipped my toes in this as well. But that experiential marketing part that we get with vacation rentals, with big flashy photos and really cool virtual tours with Matterport or what have you, and another kind of retailer in that space. I really think that the multifamily housing space can use that and use that to its advantage as well. I think that the same people who are looking to, celebrate, or not celebrate, but enjoy their vacation to the most, are also looking to enjoy every day in their apartment. And they want to go to site and see a property that they can see themselves living in, and they can see themselves relaxing in and being happy in, and, enjoying like all those beautiful little spaces that the apartment communities create for them. And I think that the vacation rental industry really does a great job about capturing those spaces through photography for their properties. And they do a good job of capturing people within those spaces as well. And that's not to say that that all properties within the multifamily housing space, that they don't do this. I definitely think that there's some out there who do a really great job of this, and capturing that experiential part that people are looking for, especially in today's day and age. But I think that's something that a lot more can kind of get on the train as well.
Well, that's super interesting because Matterport is a big supplier in this space too. And in fact, I think, Reed, I don't know if you saw this, but just last week they released a new version of their app where you can take a 3D Matterport tour on your cell phone. It does the same thing as like the Google Pixel did, where it's like you're taking lots of different versions, and then it stitches it together in the app and you use it. So hopefully that'll become a lot more accessible, Abby, like you're talking about. But it's surprising me, I guess, that I would imagine that if you're a property in your world, a vacation rental world at Breckenridge, I would think you'd have less resources at your disposal than you do as an apartment. And so if you're saying that it's pretty typical in the vacation rental world to be able to scale that they're giving Matterport tours to every location, to me that's like a red warning or something that says like, well, why the heck, when you have a 50 or $100 million building here in apartments, why can't we then do the same? Or why don't we do the same thing? Why aren't we scaling it? So are there other tidbits there that you're like, wow, they really scale this well in vacation rentals, and I don't know why no one sees the value or does it here in apartments?
Yeah, I would say this, and this is something that I would say isn't necessarily done not well in apartments, but the kind of the value of retention with vacation rentals. And I would go back to like with their property owners. I mean, retention is huge because it makes up their entire business, which is the same with property managers and their residents as well. But retention that, they drive through the communication, and just constant back and forth with their property owners, letting them know what's going on, making sure that they're happy, I think I witnessed that one-on-one because I was within the industry. I saw all the communication that was going back and forth. And then if you relate that to, I just moved out of my apartment about a year ago, but I can tell you, I didn't get as nearly many as emails making sure I was happy as a resident. And I did really like my apartment. We would have renewed there had we not decided to move into our own house. And so I think that that's a really big space where apartments can maybe, kind of jump on that train as well, in terms of really driving through that retention for their residents, because obviously, it's our job to make sure that they get new residents, but it's also their job to make sure that their residents are happy as well. Because that's how they get lease ups. That's how they enjoy their properties, and make sure that they got the cash flowing in.
Yeah. Well, I have a question. Comparatively, one of the things we feel as an underserved, I guess, area of marketing at large within multifamily are the websites themselves and the SEO and CRO, which is, tied, kind of bridging those two. But how was it in the vacation rentals as far as the sophistication of their sites, the technology they were using to make sure that they were actually capitalizing on the leads that you were generating? So that's still a frustration point. And maybe for you, it's actually gotten better as I see your smile, but that's still a source of, I'll say, friction and frustration, at least for me and David, because in our backgrounds, we were accustomed to seeing sites that were highly optimized in a lot of different verticals so that the media was working smarter, not harder. And it just seems like we're still in a stage with multifamily where it's not working as smartly as it could be, based on some of the restrictions, the templates, and the lack of attention to SEO. So yeah, if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit about, how much of a priority that was, and were you accustomed to working with kind of the same types of CRMs and CMSs, and how much access did you get to that, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say it was, and probably, I'm guessing now at this point, being probably about 7 months removed, it was about as much of a priority as it is in multifamily housing. So the websites, at least in my experience, are not really at the top level that they probably could be in terms of optimizations. I know that my company personally made a huge push for SEO, because our leadership team saw a huge potential in that. And so that was one of my really big initiatives while I was there. And I believe it's still one for them now. But I think that something similar to the multifamily housing industry is that the vacation rental industry relies really heavily on its version of ILSs. So there we're talking about booking.coms. For some reason, booking.com is the only one coming to my mind right now. But essentially, and I believe those were called OPTs while I was there, which is funny because I almost forgot what that one is called. And it was just a totally big switch when I came in that these were called ILSs. So because they rely on those third-party sites, there isn't as much push for them to make their sites kind of top-notch, And again, I go back into every industry has its own different levels of companies. And I would say that there are some there that it's a huge thing for them to really focus on SEO and make their websites optimizable and kind of focus on those leads for specific properties. And then there's other ones that are just totally relying on things like Airbnb, and those booking.com third-party sites. So it's a little, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just, on the directories that you're talking about, I think that's really interesting. Did you touch those much, or did you have much to do there? And and if so, I'm curious if you knew what the business model was like if they were taking a cut or if it was like a sponsorship grade. I'm just wondering how we can tie it to how the ILSs operate here.
Those are my follow-up questions.
Oh, sorry.
I just said those are my follow-ups. It's good when you've been working with somebody long enough that they could just ask this shit for you. So very well done, David.
One line. So they do take a cut. I would work in there in terms of help, just really reviewing the properties. The location owners really take front on that, and they let me, kind of ask me to look at it from a marketing standpoint, on a property by property basis. But the booking sites to take a huge cut. So that was something that we marketed for, as the vacation rental kind of home base for our specific properties was, less fees, essentially, no fees booking with us. It's, 10% cheaper than it is on Airbnb. And you have to kind of make those certain call outs obviously without alienating yourself from those sites like Airbnb and booking.com and things like that. But I mean, that was one of the biggest selling points of booking direct as opposed to booking with them. You're good. David?
I think we lost Reed.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My bad. Yeah, no different than a lot of marketplaces out there, right? You have to decide, is it, it can't be, if I can't beat them, join them mentality, or
right.
Is there some sort of middle ground? When you think about the iTunes store and Amazon, I mean, 70-80% of your revenue goes to them right off the bat. So it is interesting for me and David, anytime we hear about other marketplaces, what those splits look like. And then my other question on that would be, how much data did you see? So one is like how much influence, but then were you able to make optimizations or see the impact of social and how it, ultimately fueled those directory like conversions?
Yeah, I think that, the ones that we marketed for in terms of properties, because we would market on the location basis, and then depending on budget, if I was able to market for every single individual property or just a few at a time, and I would get kind of like those few from the client or the location owner. So you can definitely see there was a direct correlation between the ones that we had ads running for and the ones that were kind of booking up or getting increased bookings on those third party sites, which was really interesting as well. And something I didn't mention, and I actually wrote down as I was prepping for this that I wanted to talk about as well, that we noticed in the vacation rental industry is dynamic pricing, which is something that's really interesting that I think, if done well, and probably much trickier within multifamily housing, could be adopted as well. But something that we see within airlines too, is probably the best way to describe it is, pricing changes day by day, whether you're looking at it on a weekend or on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and for a special. And I think I don't personally see that. I know that we recently started running our dynamic pricing ads. And it's great to see that we have properties that are using dynamic pricing, but I think it's something that a lot more communities could adopt as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have these people that don't believe as much in dynamic pricing because they believe that, hey, I know better than the machine, and I will we'll meet once a week or every other week and change pricing based on my human experience. And then you have those that you're referencing, Abby, in the apartment space that are like, I'm going to completely work with yield management or revenue management systems that will adjust day by day. I would say, like, I'll just use this as a soapbox opportunity for a second, but those folks that are on dynamic pricing in apartments, there needs to be more consideration taken to working with each person's agency to then feed that information over to the agency so that the agency can do similar to what you guys have started doing on paid media, where they can start adjusting the price by day. But I think and that's the first step. The second step is making sure that everyone understands the update timeline, because each of these different pricing systems have a different time of day that they update their feed. And if you're updating the feed, but at, 8 a.m., but your agency is updating the feed at 6 a.m., it's like, now really you only cross over for 2 hours a day. Otherwise you have yesterday's rates. So I think the airline websites have done a good job of integrating that way with the different agencies, so they can take the feed and do it more real time. In apartments, there still seems to be quite a bit of a lag, and folks don't, I'll say this, like, folks that I talk to on the apartment side don't understand when their feed updates as well. So it's harder to do a nice baton handoff on getting those updates done seamlessly, let's say. So that's my soapbox.
Well, I was going to ask a little bit about the CRM. So I don't know how acquainted or familiar you got with them, but I don't want to say a movement, because I feel like it's, within the last several months, there'll be more conversation around bots, chat bots, and, multi-channel like CRMs. And then, you don't hear about it for a little while and then it resurfaces. So I just didn't know how active that conversation was. If there was some technology that you got your hands on or got to observe that you thought was more impressive than others. I think it's always fascinating. I know David does too. Just, when you go from one category to the next, there's a lot of similarities, like as far as deconstructing them, but then it's different players. So it's just, we've talked, and I'll finish, hand it over to you here, but about going to adjacent categories and potentially taking our technology with us. But it doesn't seem like, even in scenarios like this, from vacation rental to multifamily, that we're hearing a lot of the same names, which is a little surprising to me. Like, you don't hear about Knock, Entrata, RealPage, So yeah, share with us what you can about some of the CRMs and technology that were more specific, I guess, to vacation rental.
So I think it all kind of goes back to that idea that I would say a lot of the vacation rental sites rely heavily on those third parties. And because of that, they don't have a lot of CRMs on site. And again, there are going to be some that do, and they're probably specific to those sites. But there's not a lot that also don't, just because they don't invest as heavily into their own personal websites. The company that I was working for, we personally didn't use a CRM. We had it built as kind of part of our IP into our site. So we kind of built out our own CRM that was part of our site that both prospective renters and property owners or what have you could use. And then it would go to the third person sitting next to me mm-hmm. in the office who would, kind of answer it and be the chat bot, if you would. So it was really interesting kind of coming over into this space, like you said, Reed, because there's tons here, tons and tons of CRMs, some more prevalent than others, I think. But it was something, and that's a difference too, where I think here in multifamily housing industry, where properties also rely, in some way on those third parties, but they still invest into their site. So it kind of shows like that little bit of difference from the vacation rental industry, where I really don't think that we see those CRMs as quite as often as we do here in multifamily housing.
Yeah. Oh, it makes sense. I'm sure David has a follow-up that would have been mine, so I don't know whether to let him go or not. Half kidding here. I'm going to ask her somewhat random question, but Sojourn, have you heard of them by any chance? So you probably know by now, this is somebody that we'll be bringing in. They're actually headquartered out of Omaha, but they've dealt with all sorts of repercussions, of course, of COVID, like many others, but in particular in the resort travel field. But they exploded onto the scenes, and we were hearing and talking about them more when I was at Denver Post and Ad Taxi about their position in the market. And they really were data providers, but they also then followed up with solutions. So they were kind of data management platform for travel focused or vacation focused industries. So just didn't know if they're did you have any experience outside of just being aware of them, and B, were there any other, I guess, competitors or unique solutions that were out there outside of just these directories? So I get it that majority, just like with apartments, money goes to ILS, but then there's these kind of emerging, I guess, solutions or marketplaces that, are disruptive. So I didn't know if there was any similar companies to that come to mind.
I think one, this could be wrong, and I might have to look it up because I'm going to forget the name. There was something that, I think something that you see more often than like a CRM might be like an experiential booking agent, if that makes sense. So we did have connections with some of those where they would connect to site, and then a user could call in and say book for their snowboard rental or their ski lift or what have you in that way. And we saw, I think, a few of those, at least in my space, more often than I would see a CRM, really, because again, it relates back to the renter,
right,
and kind of their overall experience. So I didn't have personally too much experience outside of beyond knowing Sojourn and conversations that we've had internally about them, but again, I just feel like the space, they rely a lot more heavily on those third party sites to kind of market for them, so they don't have to worry about their own chatbots, because Airbnb and all those sites, they have chatbots on site.
Right.
So
right.
They kind of rely, say, well, they've got it, so I don't need it,
No, that makes sense. David, did you have a follow up there?
Well, just, I think it's really interesting from, I guess I'll say from an industry standpoint, how it sounds like you're saying Airbnb and VRBO and Booking.com have done such a good job of building out their own end-to-end technology that there's less need for this like complicated middleman thing going on. versus in apartments, for one reason or another, even though I'm sure vacation rentals have been around for a while, but the real, I guess, boom, as far as the aggregation of things once Airbnb started to come out is really, to me, really interesting to see how now there aren't these middlemen with their claws in. And Reed, we talk about how the ILSs have a stranglehold on this industry and have done such a good job of keeping everyone out. It sounds like it's happening in a more upstream manner in vacation rentals. And so it'll be interesting. Basically, 3 or 5 years from now, there's going to be an opportunity for someone to come in and disrupt that marketplace, and dethrone these folks that people are wed to, and try to start reducing some of those massive fees that the booking sites are taking. So I'm just saying it's really interesting. Well, I don't have anything else. I don't know, Reed, if you have one. We got to wrap this up here in a minute, but if you have any other things, or if Abby has something we didn't get.
No, I thought this was great. That was really helpful and interesting. And yeah, Abby, it's great for a podcast. So, Abby,
awesome.
Any parting thoughts? You mentioned you did a little prep work, so I don't want to shortchange you if you had anything else you wanted to share with us today.
No, I was just one thing I was going to touch on to what David just said, was really, I think at the end of the day, and I think this goes to any user experience online, is it goes to trust for the website. And I think that Airbnb within the vacation rental industry did a really good job of kind of coining that term. It's very Febrezed, like, oh, I got my Airbnb. And the Airbnb isn't an Airbnb. It's part of a different company, but they're booking on Airbnb. And so it kind of goes into that trust. Like, are you going to book it on this third party that or are you going to book it on this random site and worry about showing up to a house that looks something like the house that you're seeing? Whereas with an apartment industry, I don't think that we have that issue quite as much, because I think that people know that the apartment that they're living in isn't owned by apartments.com or another ILS. And then they go to the apartment and check it out, whether virtually now or in person in non-COVID time, to see it and make sure that it's legit in a way. I think that's kind of a big difference as well.
That's a great point, and it is a huge difference. I'd be curious. I mean, getting back to David, just leaving us with the thought of or idea about who and how you disrupt that industry. That would be your biggest challenge, that you actually don't face with multifamily. Yes, we have the Greenzilla, as I call them, apartments.com, but you're right, they don't own any apartments. And so in fact, of course, Airbnb does not own those units. They do have, just even that much more of a stranglehold from a branding standpoint. So it makes it that much more difficult, in how you would disrupt that.
Yeah, I actually think that maybe as we move into single family rentals, down the line, we may see more of that. I mean, I don't know. I'd be curious to know if I don't know. I just don't know what I don't know when it comes to single family rentals, because I guess I don't immediately as a consumer equate like Zillow or Airbnb as like a long-term rental play to worry about it. So I think even single family rentals, I'd start to be like, well, let me vet this a little bit more. With multifamily, I think I immediately are like, well, there's 100 other units in this building, 200 other units. I'm less worried about it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, cool. This was great, Abby. Thanks for joining us. And like I said, we'd love to see you. And you probably could just with this podcast, but we transcribe these anyways, right? And release them as blogs, David?
Yeah.
Yeah. But as a jumping off point, just as you continue to go through the journey and immerse yourself further and further, like David and I have in multifamily, just, what learnings you have, observations and opportunities. So really good stuff.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Cool.
All right, here we go.